his local, I think, Congress people reached out to him later that day, and they took care of it. That several strings were pulled, and he swore that it saved his life. That he goes, I know that I would have been killed within 24 hours of landing back in Russia. And so, that's another thing where I feel like what's the most meaningful thing I've done is like, well, I've kind of helped save a person's life. And so that's been fun.
Welcome to the Leader's Mindset, where we bring you conversations with leaders who are making an impact in business and our communities. My guest today is Mickie Kennedy. He's the CEO of eReleases and helps small businesses, startups, and authors gain credibility and authority through public relations. Thanks for joining us today, Mickie.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. So tell us about eReleases and how you help businesses.
So, yes, I run eReleases. I started in 1998 and have changed over the years, but we are a partner of PR Newswire. If you've ever heard of them or used them, you probably know they're very expensive. They currently charge a little over $1,800 to move a 600-word press release nationally. Through us, you can move a press release nationally over PR Newswire for a fraction of the price, probably about 25% of what you would pay through going directly through them. The caveat is you have to be an entrepreneur or a small business or a startup. Basically, you're not a publicly traded company or a business that's doing hundreds of millions of dollars. Basically, someone that their salespeople would be interested in working with directly. And so we're a huge savings on behalf of a lot of small businesses, largely because we work with so many. We do about 10,000 press releases a year, and I get to see a lot of press releases that work and a lot of patterns that people should be focusing on and increase their likelihood of getting earned media. And that's what we call it when a journalist actually writes an article about you based on that press release.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. That's what press releases are for, is to try to get a company or a person earned media. So real quick for our audience, what's the difference between earned media and other kinds of media?
So the other types of media that people are probably used to are ads. So, those are pretty obvious paid ads. And if you've ever, looked at a magazine or something, we sort of just scroll past the ads. We just treat them as nonsense. And but when we read an article, it's completely different. So it's like I'll see an ad in, say, a computer magazine, and I just go beyond, and all of a sudden there's a review that someone wrote about an actual product, and I'm like, oh, I'm invested. I want to see what this journalist thinks. And so there's a big difference. That's almost like an implied endorsement or huge credibility indicator when a journalist writes about you. There's the assumption that you've been vetted, and they're not making claims that we just see as ad speak. It certainly is something that a third party has written and signed off on. And the other types of things, there are different things now where people are doing sponsored placements. I see a lot of people who will, on LinkedIn, will promote their Forbes article where they paid to be on a section of Forbes that will never be in a magazine. And it's not on the main section of Forbes either. It's what used to be like part of their blogs, and they had these featured bloggers and stuff like that. Now it's become a mechanism for people to pay for placement. I'm not about that either. I'm looking for real, genuine, actual articles, actual earned media when a journalist writes about you.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people still don't know is Forbes is one of the big players in this, but there are others where you basically can go to them and say, I would like an article. Actually, they come to you and go, would you like an article? And it'll cost you this, right?
Right.
And it just doesn't carry the same weight as a journalist finding your story, and kind of, as much as media is changing, there's still a lot of credibility in that.
Right. And look at the traffic of these websites like Forbes. Forbes isn't promoting these guest articles. You're not going to get access to their subscriber base really looking at you and your article. The only real exposure you're going to get from that article is whoever you put that link in front of. And that's a huge difference. Like when you get picked up in Forbes organically, you're going to be exposed to all their subscribers and users. And the fact that you aren't exposed and you paid for placement, it's because you've been segmented on a section of their website that's not part of their regular newsletter feeds and, homepage scrolling, featured articles and things like that. So it really is not giving you access to their audience. And that's the real value of earned media, is you get access to the audience and communities of these publications. And that's why I think that paid placement just doesn't work.
Yeah, so when you see on somebody's LinkedIn banner or on their website banner, as seen in Forbes or some other publication, it may not mean that they had earned media. It may mean that they had paid placement, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so it's all about getting earned media. It's all about getting journalists to write a story about you and your business. What are journalists looking for?
So journalists are looking for things that are either going to entertain or educate or possibly both their audience. And so a lot of people come to press releases with a sort of a guilty focus, where it's like, hey, we have this event or thing that's really important to us. We have a new product or a new service, and we just want to get it out there to people. And I'm like, that's great. I understand it's very important to you. How can you make it important to the audience? How can you make them care? The most popular type of press release we get is a product launch or service launch release. And often it's written as, here's the product, here's the service, here's a list of features, here's a quote by the CEO or president, and that's it. And for a journalist, that's not a lot that's going to interest their audience. And one of the easiest things that you can do in that situation is incorporate a use case study. Put someone who beta tested your product or service, what their experience was, what their obstacles were, how you solved it, and what the outcome was, and then have a quote by them. That's going to be much more powerful. That's going to sustain a bit of drama. And so it's like, hey, you have a new logistics software solution, and here's a company that beta tested it for 6 months. They were 3 years old. Every year they lost money. And then you can take a publicly available data point, like saying, in the transportation industry, 67% of new companies fail in their first 5 years because they don't achieve profitability. And then, boom, what happened with their experience? After using your product for 6 months, they're now projected to have a 7% net profit for the first time ever. And it's like, that's a huge turnaround for a company that looked like they were going to be a casualty of that 5-year curse of failing. They've completely been turned around because of your product or service. And then have a quote by them saying, hey, we always thought if we just won more bids, we would be successful and profitable. And what we realized is without this software getting us to write quotes that are profitable, we didn't realize that we were winning quotes that were actually making us lose money, or something to that effect, something that talks about what your product or software solved. And that is much more compelling, much more dramatic. That a journalist will say, this is a little bit of intrigue and interest that my audience is going to like, because you brought in someone who was failing, they're an example, and now you've turned them around. That's so much more interesting and dramatic than here's a list of features. And so you got to go back and sort of reverse engineer what you want to announce through the lens of a journalist who is trying to determine how will this be perceived by our audience? And so make sure that you're addressing that and trying to elevate what you're talking about to sort of address those concerns.
Yeah, so it's funny because this is a challenge that all entrepreneurs, all business owners, all businesses have to face at some point early in their development as a business. Is we can't just be talking about what we think is cool. We can't just create a product that we think is cool. We have to be solving somebody's problem for them. And that's something that every business has to go through, because that's how a lot of businesses start. I have a great idea of something I want, and then I go start a business on that, but I'm not really solving anyone else's problem. And then I have to figure out how to pivot the business to do that. And in this case, it's about talking about something that's interesting to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I think if you look at articles that people cover, there's generally something very interesting that's happening. Journalists like to write with a story arc, and they like to build to something and sort of have a payoff. And a lot of press releases are sort of one-dimensional without that. And it's like, what can you put in there that can be more of the ingredients for a story arc? Sometimes it's your story. There's a reason that everybody that goes on Shark Tank, one of the first things they do is not open with their numbers, but open with their story. Sometimes it's like I was laid off, and my dad had just died, and I remember we used to build this little widget and sell it on the weekends, and I was wondering, can I build a business around this? And all of a sudden, we are brought in through this human interest element, and we care. So is there a human interest element that you can bring into your press release? Sometimes that's appropriate, especially with a new company launch, or maybe there's a new product or a pivot or a service that you're doing that is relevant, where you can bring in a personal experience. Those do really well. I think that in the early 2000s, all the media, every time they wrote about eBay, was about how the founder had created this to solve the problem of his girlfriend at the time, who wanted to sell her Pez collection. And she wanted to sell them individually, and she didn't have a mechanism for that. So he created it. It turned out it was PR fluff that was created, but it was something that was incorporated in almost every article, because it really got to the thing of like, this solves a problem where if you have a collection and you want to maximize your return, you don't sell them as a whole, you sell them individually. And there wasn't a place for that at that time, and it was an auction environment. It was really interesting, and it really broke it down and made it very simple for people to understand. And that's one of the beautiful things about having a human interest element. You get people to care, but also sometimes it's easier to make what you're doing more simplified and understandable from their standpoint.
Yeah, it sounds like business owners and entrepreneurs need to be thinking about the stories they need to tell about their business, their product, their service back in the early stages when they're first forming ideas. Now, in absence of that, because we can't turn back time, what are some of the questions you ask your clients to get them thinking this way?
So, some of the questions I ask them is, what was your impetus for creating the company, the products, the services? If you've introduced a new change to a product or service update, like, hey, now we're addressing this, what was that? Likely that goes back to a customer who was a very important customer of yours, who said, hey, this is really needed. And you agreed with them and you implement. Bringing them into the story of saying, hey, we had this product or software, but we heard from a customer who's like, hey, this would be much stronger if you could also do this. And this is what I'm having to do to make this work. And all of a sudden you've solved that. So it just makes it easier to break down and creates a little bit more of drama and more story interest from someone. So, I think that's really important. I also ask people, who their hero is in their industry, who their enemies are, and why. Surprisingly, that could work really well. I had a carpet company in New Jersey. I can't think of a more non-newsworthy company to work with. They did not manufacture carpet. They didn't make anything unique. They just installed carpet well. Like, you probably have numerous carpet companies in your area. But the thing that they talked about was how the big box home improvement stores were so bad for the carpet industry. The padding that they use is really inferior. And, according to him, 80% of the wear on a carpet is not the carpet itself, it's the actual padding. The carpets are almost a commodity. And, the Home Depot and Lowe's of the world are using this much inferior padding. And then secondly, they are using installers who may not be carpet installers. The only qualification is they call a list of people who have a home improvement license in the state and say, hey, we have 2,400 square feet of carpet that need to be installed. Are you available to do it? And if you just contacted a roofer who doesn't have any work, they may be going to YouTube that night to figure out how to install carpet and show up the next day and put your carpet in. And so we talked about that industry blind spot and did a press release, and it got picked up in over a dozen floor trade publications. It was something that the industry had probably knew was there, but hadn't really identified it and talked about it in print before. And so it did extremely well. And the people got contacted for a lot of quotes about that. And we continue to use that same angle of industry blind spots for the rest of the year, doing 4 or 5 more releases on different types of elements involving how people market against the big box home improvement stores, how they educate the client what they're getting. And it worked very effectively. At the end of the year, they had over 30 articles that they had gotten picked up in. They had also got picked up in their local newspaper and New Jersey Magazine, which was a big high-end consumer magazine that was very important for them. And they took all of that and put it into what they call a brag book, where they had this big binder of all these clippings. And by every time they go to someone's home and measure and give them a quote, they would say, hey, we may not come in the cheapest, but we do really quality work, and we've identified some of the problems in the industry, like how big box home improvement stores are bad for the industry. And they just go through the book very quickly, like usually a minute or two. The customer may or may not want to look a little bit closer, but based on just doing that and adding that to their consultations, they started closing about 17% more of those consultations. So almost a fifth, 20% increase in conversions by just taking that earned media and adding it to the sales process. And so that's one of the big benefits of getting media attention. Their customers are never going to read those floor trade magazines. It's other companies who own carpet companies and things like that. But they were able to take that and leverage it and show that they have a huge reputation within the floor and carpet industry. And they've been nationally recognized for identifying a real problem. And that legitimacy really increased the conversion rate, and people all of a sudden said, yeah, we might save $400 or $500 going with this company, but we know these people are experts, and they really they have great reviews, but they also have been identified nationally by a lot of places, and that's very valuable.
That's fantastic. I do have to say I'm a little concerned, but also inspired that a home improvement professional is going to go to the same source to learn how to put carpet in like I would and go to YouTube. So mixed bag there, right? But
Right.
tells me I'm doing the right thing when I'm trying to figure out my home improvement projects. So you talked about story arcs earlier. What makes a good story that will attract earned media? What are some of the elements? I know you've got an online course about this, but can you give us some highlights?
Yeah, I think anything that gets someone involved and caring. So people love to champion the underdog. And so if you have a use case study involving a customer that had a turnaround as a result of your product or service, that's like the most ideal type of story arc, because it really shows the huge difference that you made. But even if you didn't turn around a business, if they see a measurable result and they talk about it and they're willing to share the numbers, that's also good and compelling. Other types of story arcs is, your story. It may not be that you launched the company today, but maybe you did it 15 years ago. I had a client who she was celebrating 20 years in business, and one of the things she said is, my mother, who has since passed, was always so proud of me because she said, I was a failure in life. I was just a homemaker. And I was like, wow, that's amazing that she felt so terrible about doing something that is so amazing. My mom was a homemaker for many years, and to believe that, she felt bad about it. And so she wrote a few quotes about that, about how her mother to her was one of the strongest people she knew, and how she was so proud of her that she was doing something that she didn't do. And her mother had a lot of regret that she didn't feel more empowered in her life. And so that did very well. It got people to care, this little story. And so they don't always have to be the product or service launch, but they can be something that are touchstones that you mentioned later in a press release, and a journalist reading and, getting a little bit more information can use those to sort of flesh it out, the story, and make you more human and relatable and get people to sort of care. So be vulnerable. I think that a lot of people, especially small businesses and mom and pops and people who are just starting side businesses, like to appear larger than they are. And what you don't realize is being small it gives you an advantage when it comes to the media. Journalists like to be seen as curators. They get the most shares and the most accolades and page views for articles where they spotlight new companies, new products, new services. And these are not the Microsofts and Googles of the world. If it's a big, giant corporation in the industry, most people already know about them. And so they would much rather put the spotlight on a new company or a new product or service that no one knows about, that might be one employee or two employees, than they are covering the big guys. They have to cover the big guys in the industry, but they also know that they get less engagement with those articles. And so, own your size, own that you're new, own your failings. I had a client who talked about an experience in the where they really got success, and it was around Thanksgiving time where they got inundated with orders, and they're just like, we don't know how we're going to be able to fulfill all these to reach people by the end of the year. And so they sort of put a pause on Thanksgiving and got the whole extended family out in the garage, which they were still at the time, doing fulfillment and putting products in boxes and doing labels and stuff. And they were really embarrassed by that. At the time, they had grown outside of their home and now had office space and warehouses. And I just said, I think that people are really going to identify it, especially startups and people who've been there when people do grow out of their garage. And so that was the introduction, that story, that anecdote, to a 2-page article in Inc. magazine for them. And so that really shows that a lot of the things that people feel that they don't want to share and are little blips or embarrassments or things that show their size are elements of weakness. And when it comes to the media, they're often things that are your superpowers and help you rise to the level of interest. Because again, the people who read that Inc. magazine are right there like, wow, going along with them saying, we've all been there. A lot of business owners where we had to, sacrifice for the family, and our family had to come together and help. And I think that that's something that felt very universal for a lot of entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I know I feel that way. Whenever I read an article in Inc. or one of those magazines like that, Entrepreneur, it's, I'm right there with them because I'm going through some of the same struggles myself as an entrepreneur. And it's great to know that we can make some journalist's day by having a story that they're interested in that's not about somebody they've written about a million times before.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the other tools that businesses can use to generate earned media, like an industry survey?
So an industry survey is one of the best ways for someone who just feels like they're not newsworthy or they don't have anything newsworthy at the moment. And basically, you're taking the pulse of other people in your industry and sharing it to the media. And the media generally loves this. They love getting these survey results. Generally, you want at least 100 responses to be somewhat statistically relevant from the standpoint of a journalist being interested. But it doesn't have to be exhaustive. And you don't really even have to have a Rolodex. You could say, hey, I don't really know 100 people in my industry. You could really go to industry associations, and you're going to have the best results with the smaller and more independent ones. Everybody probably knows the large associations in your industry. They don't need you. And if you approach them, they're probably not going to be very cooperative. But if you go to one that's more independent, like in public relations, everybody knows PRSA. And I had someone point that out to me. Well, there's nobody else, Mickie. And I'm like, well, there's over 700 other PR associations in the United States. So this person who was a veteran of PR, she had a couple of decades on me. She was shocked. And I pointed out, yeah, many of them are small, like, mid-Atlantic PR associations or, Florida or African-American owned PR firms and stuff like that. But there are some that, like, one was small PR firms of 50 employees or less. Probably represents 80% of the PR industry, and it had a couple thousand members. And so that was one I said would be ripe for reaching out to. And if you go to them and say, hey, I've got this link, I use SurveyMonkey, it makes it easy to analyze the results and collect them. And I usually do multi-pages. So if someone stops during the survey, I've got the most important answers already covered in the beginning. And I take the link and I say, hey, is there a chance you could share this with your members? In exchange for that, I will feature you in a press release I'll be issuing over PR Newswire in the coming weeks. And about 2/3 of the time, they'll say yes, because it's an opportunity for them to get some media attention as well as you, and you get access to their audience. And I do tell them that I am looking to get at least 100 results. So generally, if we don't get it from an email send or something, they'll do a little bit more of a social media outreach and maybe a secondary email send to get the numbers up so they don't lose that opportunity. And then I look at the numbers of the survey, and figure out what's going to be the most shocking or surprising response here. You want to ask timely things that are specific to maybe what's going on in your industry. Look at the world that we live in. Is AI affecting your industry? You could potentially ask questions around that. Is there, an economic situation either in your industry or in the United States or even globally? Are people beginning to, advertise less and, cut their spend down and not hire? You can ask questions around that, but, pick whatever questions you might want to ask others at a trade show or conference. Like, hey, have you noticed this? Because I have. And is this just my company or is other people getting a sense for that? So, pick the question, focus one or two questions for the press release, but do create a page on your website where you put all of the analysis, every question, every response, and the percentages, because journalists will sometimes go in there and hunt for a second or a third story from that survey. But you want to lead the press release to focus on one or perhaps two of the big aha questions that you asked, or the most surprising ones. You're going to have an amazing quote of why you felt the number skewed a particular way. You never have to agree with it. So if you're in the graphic design world and 70% believe AI is going to replace them in the next 5 years, you can say, while I think that's a bit alarmist, I do think that those who don't know how to start incorporating AI into their workflow might be at a serious disadvantage in the next 5 years. And so it's a way for you to sound very reasonable. But by you being the author of that survey, your name and your company is going to be put in every article that gets written. And on average, I see about 8 to 14 industry articles every time someone does an industry survey. And I'd love to claim that this is my idea, but I actually had a client who represented a lot of different verticals. And at the time, I kind of considered them a link farm when they first started working with me over a decade ago. And they would have the top 10 CRM for architects, the top 10 graphic software for designers. And that was pretty much their thing. And they did these industry surveys for each of these verticals. And they got, like I said, 8 to 14 articles almost every survey. And they were doing 30 surveys a year. And they got so much link love from that, and so much recognition in all these industries, that they ended up suspending most of these surveys after several years, and still getting media mentions every time there's a consolidation or a merger rumor. They want to get, what's your opinion on this in your industry? They've elevated themselves to being industry experts to the point that the media is clamoring and coming to them. And it all started from doing the industry surveys.
That's great. So what is newsjacking, and what are your thoughts on it?
So newsjacking is where something's trending right now and you jump on it. It worked for 10 minutes 15, 20 years ago. Today, it doesn't work. And so after the Target credit card breach years ago, I had a client come to me and said, I think I'm going to do a newsjacking press release about that. So I said, let's go to Business Wire and PR Newswire. Those are basically the two large newswires in the U.S. We have basically a duopoly of newswires. There's other newswires you probably heard of, like Reuters and UPI, but they don't issue press releases. They might accept them, but everything that they issue is written by them, and they get paid licensing fees by newspapers who, rather than them write the article, Reuters and AP have written the article. And so, we looked. And on Business Wire, I think there was like 600 or 700 articles or press releases we saw of people who were newsjacking, over 1,100 on PR Newswire. And I just told them, I said, there's probably going to be 150 articles written about this, in total. The likelihood of you being the one that they plug in is going to be very low newsjacking. You're going to have better results if you're a contrarian. And so everybody's going to be writing from the vantage point of, hey, this is a Target credit card breach. We're security consultancy. You could be at risk if you take credit cards. Here's what you need to know. Everybody's saying that. Are you willing to be the person that says, hey, do you have a credit card terminal? Well, I knew that their audience was not big companies, but mostly retail and actual brick and mortar companies, like, and not chains. They often work with like a dry cleaner that might have 2 locations, or a pizza shop that has 1 location. That was their bread and butter for security and credit card merchant setups. And so I'm like, what are your feelings about the credit card breach? And he goes, well, security is important, but For a dry cleaner, he doesn't have to worry about it. If you've got a terminal there, you're not holding the credit card data. The processor is. So you're at zero risk. And I said, would you be willing to share that? So they were the contrarian saying, everybody right now is talking about the Target credit card breach. And if you're a small business with a credit card terminal on your counter and you're worrying if you're at risk, you have nothing to worry about. just sleep, and it's not your problem. Unlike Target, you've never made the decision to hold people's credit cards. The credit card processor is the one who does that for you, and all liability is with them. You can rest easy. And so, him being contrarian, we did it, and he got a couple of articles, which he was very happy with. But he was also a little late to the table. I think if he had just been like a week or two earlier, he might have gotten 5 or 6 articles being a contrarian. But, it's hard when everybody knows that, hey, this has become a hot button, let's jump on it. It's very hard to get picked up. The good thing about being a contrarian is every article that gets published, you have the likelihood of being plugged in there because you're the only one with a contrarian viewpoint. Journalists, believe it or not, outside of the political arena, like to be fair and balanced. And so they're looking for the pros and the cons on everything. And a lot of times they're just going to print with one side because no one's raised their hand and said, I want to talk about why electric cars are so bad for the environment and why we shouldn't be, selling them and mandating their sales at a time where a lithium car that catches on fire might take 8 fire trucks to put out and cost, tens of thousands of dollars just in that effort. And so, being a contrarian is a very valuable way. I don't think newsjacking is really going to help anymore. It was sort of started by David Meerman Scott probably a couple of decades ago or 15 plus years ago. And that was about the few seconds of which it might have worked for people, because once an idea is out there, everyone jumps on it and the competition is just too great.
Yeah, it's kind of like the stock market, right? Once most of us get the information, it's already kind of priced in, and we're not going to be able to take advantage of it. So,
right. It's like people always ask what's the best day to do a release. And a couple of decades ago, people were like, well, Mondays, because, journalists are around during the week to consider it as an article, where Friday, they're likely to start over on Monday or something like that. And, then Mondays became the worst day because 60% of press releases went out that day. And it's just too much volume and too much competition. And you just get lost in the sea of releases.
All right. Well, I want to take a break from talking about the media stuff and I want to play a game. Are you up for a game?
Absolutely.
All right. The name of this game is Rapid Response. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to respond with the first thing that comes to mind. Now, don't be fooled by the word rapid. You don't have to give a one-word answer. Elaborate as much or as little as you'd like. We just want to get to know Mickie Kennedy a little bit better, okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Mickie Kennedy, rapid response round. Your time begins now. Podcast recommendation.
So I am kind of insular. I watch a lot of mostly PR podcasts. None's really popping to mind, but there's the Duct Tape Guy is a good business one that I've followed in the past. Breaks down things very easy and understandable.
Okay, great. We'll check that out. What is a practice you'd like to see more people embrace?
I think split testing outside of advertising. I learned about split testing, I guess, close to 2 decades ago, not being a business background or marketing background, and I learned about statistical relevance and split testing, and I found it to be much more successful split testing things in my business, like business processes, and the idea of doing an A/B split test to like how you onboard your customers. And so I think that that's a really great thing that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about.
That's really great advice. I think we'll start doing some of that around here. Who is someone we should all be paying attention to?
I think Perry Marshall He is a marketing guy who taught me about statistical relevance, and I still continue to follow what he's doing, and he continues to evolve. He started with Google Ads, and now he's talking about AI and how to really get you to work on the business and not in the business, and leveraging a lot of just 80-20 principles, where if you take the 80% of what's working and jettison the 20% that's not in your business, you can make lots of improvements. Like look at the customers that give you 80% of your revenue, get rid of the other ones, and focus on more opportunities to find those people who are driving the bulk of your revenue and profit.
Great advice. What is either your get pumped up song or your walk on music?
I don't know. I grew up in the 80s, so I kind of love Eye of the Tiger and that kind of stuff that you could imagine during the Rocky movies and things like that.
Yeah, we hear Eye of the Tiger a lot. We actually heard the Chariots of Fire song once, which is an interesting answer that I hadn't thought of before, and now I can't stop thinking about that. So, the biggest influence in your life?
Let's see. I would probably say my dad. He was a big entrepreneur growing up, and seeing him dabble in a lot of different businesses and look at opportunities.
All right. What did he think about you going to school for poetry?
Well, he died when I was about 11, so he didn't get to see me do that. He probably would have been amused by it, I suspect.
No, we're all sorry for your loss. So,
thank you.
A book everyone should read.
Let's see. Perry Marshall's 80-20 of sales and marketing. It'll really get you to think about things in a way that can make your business much more scalable, and probably get rid of the bulk of your headaches.
All right, I'll add that to my list. Now, you're in Maryland. What is the best winter recreational activity in Maryland?
Probably eating crab cakes. I don't know where they get the crab meat in the winter, but I am a big foodie. I love Maryland style jumbo lump crab cakes. I also think that other activities to do in winter are entertaining with friends. Going to movies, going to poetry readings, things like that.
Fantastic. And they do crab cakes better in Maryland than anywhere else in the world. So, what is your dream vacation spot?
I think my dream vacation spot is Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. It's an area that I just love, and I have a place there, not on the beach. It's 5 or 6 miles away from the ocean, which is an area that I can afford. But it's just beautiful, and the people are lovely, and it's just a place to unwind, and it just seems like time moves a bit slower there.
That's great. What is a trend you're excited about?
I think AI is an interesting trend. I don't know that I love it, especially as a writer. But I just think it's fascinating to watch and see how people are incorporating and using AI. And so I part of me feels like, are we set up for a .com crash with AI, or is this the future? I'm not sure. I do know that AI is very heavily subsidized right now. I know that OpenAI gave much of its technology away to Microsoft for them to incorporate in exchange for processing power, billions of dollars of processing that OpenAI requires. At a certain point, what's a product or service like that going to cost where we're actually paying for the processing? It's quite likely the average business user is going to pay in excess of $1,000 a month for AI, because it's just so subsidized right now by investors and other people. So I'm not sure, and maybe the prices will come down as well. But they're still making these chips, and they're still costing billions of dollars. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's really interesting to watch how the money's all flowing among a small group of companies and investors, and it's kind of propping itself up right now, and what the real business models are going to be in the future, and the comparisons to where we were in 1999 and 2000 when we did go through that first .com bust. And what did come out of that is that the tech community came out stronger with better products, but it was painful for a few years getting there.
Yeah, especially for the consumer market. The B2B, I think, rebounded a lot better .com post .com crash, but I think B2C took a little bit more time to recover.
Yeah, we all remember pets.com. So.
Right.
Last one, your favorite sports team or player?
I'm going to say the Baltimore Orioles and Ravens just because they're in my backyard. That being said, I don't generally follow either of them until we're like winning and they're like, oh, we might have a chance this year. And then you get invested. So I don't know how loyal I am.
That's okay. It's a good to know that you're into the hometown team. So thanks for playing our game. We appreciate getting to know you a little more than the business questions might get us there. So getting back to it, you talked about blind spots earlier. How do our blind spots, keep us from telling a really compelling story?
I think that a lot of times we're not even aware of the fact that things that we go through are kind of entertaining or, could potentially delight people. I mean, like, I've tried to go back and mine some of the interesting stories and things that I've had in my past. And, I've shared them with others and they're like, wow, that's crazy. And, we had someone who worked for Cher, the musical artist, as an assistant. And one of the things that Cher had her do was wrap all of her presents, because this person wrapped amazing presents in almost like origami. And she wanted to start a business where people would have their products shipped to her and she wrapped them for you and charged, I think, $100 a gift. And I was like, I don't know that this is a good story. And she said, well, my boss is really a big proponent. And I was like, oh, and she kept mentioning Cher. And I said, is this the same Cher? She goes, yeah. And I said, would Cher be comfortable giving you a quote? And she goes, yeah. And so I talked to the Newswire and they're like, well, it's like an implied endorsement. So we need something in writing from Cher or her legal team. And so Cher gave us a letter saying, I authorize my use of my quotes in this. And we sent it out, and that person ended up being picked up as Minority Entrepreneur of the Year. It was several years back, and did extremely well with it. And it's like, I got to talk to Cher for a few minutes on the phone. I had another client who had used us quite a bit. He was an entrepreneur in New York City, and he had come over from Russia and actually testified in Congress about corruption among some of the oligarchs in Russia and name names and things that they were doing. And the administration changed a few years later, kind of what some people are experiencing right now. And all of a sudden they were like, oh, Russia's not an enemy, country to us. We're allies. So you should not have any kind of amnesty to leave Russia. And so you have to go back. And so he said he was actually got a phone call from one of the attorneys representing the oligarch. And they said, we know what time your plane's going to land, because they gave him a ticket to fly back. The U.S. did. And you're leaving on Thursday. Here's your seat. And it was already shared with the oligarch. And they said, we'll be there with a car to pick you up. And this guy had exhausted over 2 years and several $100,000 trying to stay in the U.S. And he was down to a week and a half on a Thursday. He's leaving. And so we sent out a Hail Mary press release, and the Wall Street Journal picked it up that day. And the Wall Street Journal rarely does anything outside of like serious breaking news the same day, because it didn't appear in the print edition. And, but if it's important enough, they'll put it out there online that day and then print the following day. And that's what they did with him. And so his local, I think, Congress people reached out to him later that day, and they took care of it. That several strings were pulled, and he swore that it saved his life. That he goes, I know that I would have been killed within 24 hours of landing back in Russia. And so, that's another thing where I feel like what's the most meaningful thing I've done is like, well, I've kind of helped save a person's life. And so that's been fun. And I just have lots of little anecdotes like that. And to me, I was sitting on these, and until I started sharing them, I didn't realize these were blind spots. These were just my history. And so now I try to mine a lot of these experiences. And I think that you should do that. Everybody should do that. You should do that with yourself. You should go down the line, ask employees. Give employees a $50 gift card if they share an anecdote or a story of something that was either really cool, like an actionable result that the client got, or a really fun, weird kind of experience. And that's what I do with my staff so that we're recording and saving these experiences going forward, because a lot of these just get lost and people love these things. And when I share them on podcasts and other things, people just want to know more.
Yeah, I think saving someone's life from a Russian oligarch is kind of a big story. I think that gets a lot of attention.
Right.
I feel like what I'm going to ask you next doesn't quite compare to that, but you've worked with a number of companies that have gone on Shark Tank. So what have you learned working with these companies in such a high-profile venue?
Right. So I think what I've learned most of all is that a lot of startups will come to us and they'll work with us through a proper PR campaign. And by that, I mean they do a series of 6 to 8 releases, and they generally get pickup. It doesn't hurt that they've been on a national TV show. But I think that one of the ways I think that's easier for them to get pickup is they have an elevator pitch. They know what defines them and differentiates them from everybody else in their industry. They've carved out something that is extremely unique. And I think that a lot of other companies should really make sure, do you have a wide moat? What is your unique selling proposition? What is it that you do that no one else in your industry does? And if you can't articulate that, create one. Own it. I talked with someone once and they said, well, we just install, I think it was Salesforce, for a particular industry. And there's lots of people out there. We're just basically a commodity. And I'm like, wrong answer. I says, there's nothing about you that's unique or special. And he's like, no. And he goes, well, we do have like a library of like all the different things that you could do in Salesforce, like, hey, how to create, link up an appointment calendar and all this stuff. And I was, well, why is that important? He goes, well, every time you call the sales consultant like us to do it, it's like a couple $100 an hour. And if all of this stuff is there in videos, they can do a lot of it themselves. And I said, how much of this do you have? He goes, oh, I think we have about 5,000 hours of these. And I was like, that's your moat. Because if someone's looking at whether they use you or another company to install their Salesforce and get it up and running, and it's just a commodity, you having that library that could potentially save them tens of thousands of dollars, and that they can go back and try to find, hey, is this something that they've already sort of shown us that they can do for free rather than pay hundreds of dollars every time they need a tweak or a change or an implementation. And, that's something that they didn't even realize. And, that was a blind spot for them. But, what is it that you do that's unique? And I think that the people from Shark Tank know very well. And also they know that PR is not a one-hit wonder. One press release may not result in anything. The second one may not. But if you do 6 to 8 and you're doing strategic important ones, 2 or 3 are probably going to do very well. And you really only need one of them to be a slam dunk to really make a huge meaningful difference. I had someone get picked up with one article in Waste Management News, trade publication, and they built municipalities for cities. And so they got contacted by someone in Australia and says, hey, can you do this outside of the US? They go, yeah, we work with India and these other places, and we handle everything. We built the whole facility, including recycling now that we offer as an add-on, and we can ship it on boats directly to you. And we work with local contractors to get it implemented. They ended up selling to 2 cities in Australia. And I think it was over 30 or $40 million they got from just this one article. And there's lots of little things like that where people don't know that you exist, or they're looking for something and they see you in an industry publication and you just solve that problem. And so it makes it so much easier to convert people, leads from these opportunities, but then also take these articles and share them with your existing leads. If you convert at 20%, you put these articles in front of them and they get that credibility boost, you're probably going to convert your population now at maybe 30% instead of 20%. Customers always leave. It's called churn. You put these articles in front of them, they'll be like, hey, weren't we supposed to shop around this year and make sure we're using the right company? Nah, not this year. I just read this article about them. They're killing it. These are the right people. And so it'll reduce your churn rate as well.
So you started eReleases back in the early days of the internet. What was that like back in the before times? And what were some of the challenges you had to overcome back in 1998?
Okay, so I think one of the first challenges was accepting money. There was no Square or PayPal or easy things to implement. And so I used a legal service. I think it was called Multicards at the time, where they were an e-commerce platform, but they would set you up with your own little shopping cart unofficially. And then later I got my own merchant account over time and stuff like that. But that was a real challenge, how you accept money. Now it's so easy. And I think a lot of people have a lot more options of, integrating Stripe and Square and all of these other different things. So I think that's really awesome. The other thing is also, it was hard to get the word out. When I started, there wasn't really pay-per-click advertising. Like the search engines weren't monetized. And I remember Go2.com came out and eventually became Go.com. Overture, I think, was the name of it at one point. They were the first to launch pay-per-click advertising. So if someone typed in a keyword, you could advertise around it. And I thought that was a great game changer. And Google's done really well with it since.
Yeah, Google's done okay for themselves with keyword pay-per-click advertising. And it's funny, we had another founder on here who started their company in '96, I think it was, and we were like, it just was unbelievable to us. There was no putting your credit card into a website. Right. Like that came so much later. There was this weird combination of looking at stuff online and then downloading and maybe printing a form. And then
sending a check,
filling out the order form like you were going to mail it, but then faxing it to them. It was crazy back in the late '90s. So how are you adopting new technology to what you're doing at eReleases now and in your life in general?
So I do have techniques where I share with my customers how to lean on AI to write a press release. The big thing is AI is never going to decide what it's writing about. AI has been trained on the 97% of press releases on the internet that do not generate earned media. I find AI to be horrible at coming up with ideas to write a press release. So do the strategy, go to AI knowing exactly what you want it to write about, and then ask it to give you a structure, an outline. Sometimes it won't. It just wants to spit out a release. And I say, nope, I want an outline. And then I'm like, okay, now we have the outline. Give me 5 headline options for this press release that I've told you I want to write about. Here's about my company. Now give me 3 opening paragraphs for this headline that I picked among the ones you gave. And okay, I like this opening paragraph. Now give me the second paragraph. And it's like, okay, I want to have a quote in here. And the quote has to be very strong, active verbs, has to really stand out. Give me 10 quotes. Give me 5 quotes. Okay, I like this one, but I want to add this element to it. The biggest mistake people make is they'll have 3 or 4 sentences as a quote. You want one quote that sings, one sentence that just sings. It could be like creatively written, like you have a flourish for words, but most people don't. So just make sure you say something as succinctly and as active as you can. And sometimes AI can get you there, sometimes it can't. But following that model, it takes about 10 minutes, I think, for a press release, as opposed to just AI spitting out in 5 seconds. But you're going to end up with a press release that's so much stronger and better. And when it comes to how much better, every bit matters, because you're competing for journalist attention and they're reviewing releases and saying, is there a story here that's of interest? Is this going to be meaningful for my audience? And you really want to stand on your, strong as possible.
Yeah, it's really important, one, to train your AI to do what you want it to do, to make it follow through and answer the question that you asked it, not just accept what it gives you.
Right.
And then I think that's really fascinating that this works the best when you break it up into the small pieces and make decisions as you go, instead of giving it a long prompt and then just taking whatever it spits out.
Yeah, and sometimes when I tell AI, when it's writing something, pause after every sentence for 3 seconds. It never does. But I find when you tell AI to slow down, I feel like I get a more thoughtful response. I haven't been able to prove it yet, but I do. And I think that one of the ways that you can easily make AI slow down is to have it break it down by piece and giving you options where if you write up a release and say, I don't like this release, write me another, you're going to end up with a mediocre release that you're finally happy with. But if you end up with like 10 headlines and you pick the best one and you're like, hey, this comes closest. Can you give me 5 headlines that are close to this one now after the 10 you gave me? But focus on this headline. And this is what I liked about this headline. You can get there and arrive element by element with a much stronger product to share with the media.
That's great advice. I'm gonna give that a try next time I'm writing something. And yeah, that's great advice, because it's all about getting AI to give us what we're looking for, and it will still save you hours. It's if you take 10 minutes, it'll still save you hours versus the 5 seconds of just putting in your standard prompt and getting something out.
Right.
All right. So what's coming up for you in the next few months?
Well, I have a poetry book that comes out early next year, and so I'm excited about that. Business-wise, I am going to extend my free masterclass and make it a little more robust for the coming months going forward. And anybody who's interested in it, this is a masterclass I created for my customers, looking at the 3% of press releases that do get picked up and finding the patterns that are there and the types of releases that generally get picked up often, like the industry surveys. And it's completely free. It's less than an hour long at this point, but I might end up extending it again. And it's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And like I said, there's no cost for it. I don't plan on, putting a gate around it and charging hundreds of dollars, but it is something that can really make a meaningful difference, where if you build a PR campaign of 6 to 8 releases and you follow those types of releases, you'll probably have at least 3 of them get real earned media. And you can do 6 to 8 releases with eReleases, coming in with a new customer special for under $3,000. And so, I know a lot of people who spend $20,000 with a PR campaign for a year, and they still don't get much earned media. And if you handle it yourself, lean on AI for some of the writing, but you go to the AI with strategic ideas, you stand a much higher likelihood of getting media pickup, I think, than the average person using a PR firm.
Everybody go check that out. And I think that's a great place to leave it. So thank you so much for joining us. This has been great, Mickie. Where can everyone find you so they can also thank you for joining us today?
So the website's eReleases.com. All my social media is on the lower right. And you can also feel free to call, chat, or email our staff. We don't have any salespeople. It's just editors. There's no quotas or commissions. And we're really good at helping people sort of navigate through their first PR campaign, and people who don't really know a lot about PR, and help to get them started.
All right. Well, everybody get connected with Mickie. Go get that earned media. I want to thank all of you for watching and listening. If you found this conversation valuable, go ahead and share it with someone who can use it. Leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, make sure you are subscribed. You may be seeing this in your feed, and you may not actually be subscribed. So do us a favor and click that button. And since we're asking for favors, please give us a 5-star review if you're on a podcast platform that allows reviews. It really helps us build our audience and get conversations like the one we just had with Mickie out to a lot more people who can use it. So we have a lot more of these interviews coming your way. Go out there, do great things today. Onward and upward.